3, 2, 1. Action.
Well, let me tell you something, brother.
Great.
Hey Jason, how's everything going?
Oh, not too bad. How are you doing?
Yeah, all good. Thank you for talking to me. I mean, I had the pleasure of talking to Evan earlier, about a month or so ago, so it's great to kind of get your insight as
great.
well.
Oh, awesome. That's great.
I just want to say, before anything, like a huge congratulations. I heard the news yesterday on the setting the new ratings record, and obviously the quality of the series has been incredible as well. So just big congratulations on that.
Oh, thank you so much. Are you like a big wrestling fan yourself?
Oh, huge. This kind of combination of wrestling and film is kind of like my thing. So I really appreciate what you guys have been doing.
Oh, that's great. Did you say film is your thing?
Like the combination. I mean, I write both. I write about film and wrestling, but the combination is really what I love when it comes together.
Yeah, I do too.
I wouldn't have guessed that. um, like my first question, actually, this kind of just popped in my head like a few hours ago. Actually, obviously, you've kind of got the feedback for a lot of Dark Side because obviously it aired in Canada and America and various other places. But I wanted to know, like, now that it's gearing up for the UK premiere, is there still a sense of pressure, like, kind of waiting for what the new audience that hasn't seen it, what they're gonna like kind of say and like react to?
I'm not sure if there's any necessarily any more pressure. I think even like in the film world, I have when I have a film that I'm releasing, there's a lot of anxieties and stresses, leading up to the moment when you first premiere it. And usually in film, in the past, I've always been able to have that experience with an audience, like in person.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's different with this, and especially with the times we're living in. I haven't ever been able to watch these episodes with a live audience.
Yeah.
And so me and my producing partner, the nights that they premiere, we're watching on Twitter and online, and I even tune in to people's live streams of watching the shows on YouTube, just because I get, I guess maybe I just get a little bit of satisfaction, or I just like seeing people's reaction to the stories and the things that we create. So, if anything, I'm excited. It'll hopefully invigorate another, just a moment of excitement just to see another audience from another part of the world get to react to it. But I hope the reactions are similar to what they've been like here, which has been awesome.
Yeah, I'm confident they will be, if I'm honest. But I mean, one of the big things that was different for season 2, obviously aside from the different subjects, but you had Chris Jericho narrating this season as opposed to last season you had Mick Foley, and I believe you had Dutch Mantell for one episode as well.
Yeah, actually, we had Mick Foley for one, the Prince Brody episode, and Dutch Mantell for the rest of them.
Sorry, that was the order. What was the big difference, like working with Jericho compared to like Foley and Dutch? And what do you think Jericho brought that maybe those two didn't?
They all kind of bring different qualities to it. It's interesting. Like working with all of them is great because they are in some ways they'll have connections to the stories,
Mm-hmm.
And working with Chris Jericho was awesome because he especially with this season, there are more stories that are more in, within the recent times, and so he has some intel about some of the stories. And so when we do our voiceovers with him in the booth, it's cool because he'll give kind of like a little bit of a running commentary in between takes of like his perspective on some of the stories or things he has heard, and that's really cool. But they've all been amazing. They're all like super collaborative and have just like a genuine passion for wrestling and a curiosity as well still for it, which I love that aspect of it.
Yeah, no, I agreed. And I will say in terms of you, like obviously Jericho with the Benoit episode, he was very close to the subject matter, and his kind of quote, I believe it was when he talks about Chris, the one thing Chris loved, he almost killed by his actions. I had never really thought about it from that perspective, but I thought it was one of the most powerful moments across the 2 episodes.
Oh wow, yeah, yeah. It's interesting because when you watch Chris Benoit's career and the level of passion and dedication he put into wrestling, like you can just tell he was like obsessed with it since he was a kid, and it was probably something he had worked on 24/7 and probably occupied his mind so much that it's powerful to hear Chris Jericho say that, because had Chris Benoit known like the ramifications of what he did and how that would affect the industry that he loved so much, um, you know, it just makes it even more tragic in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious, what was your reaction to that? Because it was really a powerful moment.
I think that was just kind of what I was thinking in a way when Chris said it. There's a lot of like powerful things he's saying in the interview. We're just kind of living in the moment. But having we had shot a lot of interviews. I've done so much research on the topic and on Chris and Nancy Benoit's legacies and their careers. So it's just when you hear that, it just kind of gives you a little bit more perspective, because we just knew how much Chris Benoit loved wrestling,
Yeah.
And how much of his life he put into it.
Mhm.
And I think it's just a powerful thing for anyone to hear. But if you were a fan of wrestling, especially during that time period, I just know so many people, and I've heard so many times from people that when that tragedy happened, it turned them away from wrestling. And I know I have friends and people I know who had stopped watching wrestling after that moment.
Yeah.
And over the years, recently, some of them have come back to it, and that's kind of one thing we wanted to do with the episode too. Is not only the families and the people who are closest to the story, it's a way for them to kind of tell their perspective and to tell their truth. But there is for fans of wrestling at that time period, that is something that we've all lived with, and it's been something that has haunted the art form that we love so much. And there hasn't been a lot of room for an open conversation about it. And so that's what we would hope to do with the episode, was just give people an avenue to speak their truth, the people who are closely involved, but also hopefully it could in some ways give some closure to the fan base and the audience as well.
I mean, I, in my opinion, I think you guys, achieved that. And another episode, you had this season was the Road Warriors episode. And when I spoke to Evan, he joked that you only did that episode so you could get the costume team to make the shoulder pads. But
that's funny.
But I mean, it feels like, going off you guys' social media and kind of your fandom, it felt like that episode had a bit of extra significance, because I feel like there's some extra fandom when it comes to the Road Warriors with you guys.
Yeah, when I gotta be honest, when I was a kid, I was obsessed with very high concept characters, larger than life characters. I loved Batman, I loved He-Man, I loved Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, all that stuff, so much, but they weren't real. But the Road Warriors were just as high concept, even more, and they were real. I could watch them on television. I could go to an arena and actually see them. And they were, when I was a kid, the coolest toys in my toy box, And so they just have always haunted my mind. They've always stuck in my mind as this incredible image. When back in the 80s, when you would see them come out to the Black Sabbath song Iron Man, and just the sound of that theme song and the visual of what they look like and the energy that they brought into an arena, there's just nothing cooler than that. I just can't think of anything more striking in pulp culture through the dawn of time that is as striking and as cool as like the Road Warriors in the 80s. So yeah, they've always been, you know, we've always wanted to, you know, dive into the story behind the Road Warriors, and you know, obviously Dark Side of the Ring became like the perfect avenue to like do that. But yeah, they've always been a huge influence. Just, I think like even like, because wrestling I had learned when I got older had such impact on my just my artistic aesthetic, like growing up. Like it helped, it shaped a lot of the things that I became attracted to as I grew up. And I realized that as I got older, when I was kind of tracking down my roots as to like, why do I like certain things, or why do I like certain colors that like go together, and I would think, oh yeah, like back when I was a kid, like the color combinations that they would put on wrestlers because they were designing these action figures for kids, they were putting color combinations together that would attract kids like minds and their imaginations, and they were trying to design these like incredible like action figures, you know. And so I when I realized that, I've applied that thinking to like even my own, you know, feature film work in a lot of ways. Yeah, sorry, I went on a bit of a tangent there.
That's fine. Like I said, you could tell the fandom for the Road Warriors.
Yeah, they're just always been so inspiring.
Yeah. No, I agree. Certainly from the visual standpoint, that there's no one like them.
Oh my god, yeah.
I mean, and one of the things also Evan also mentioned to me was he said there's a lot of non-wrestling fans that have really kind of gravitated towards Dark Side. Is there anything in terms of like any comment or feedback that you got from someone who's not a wrestling fan at all, but they had something that really like positive to say about the series?
Well, it's one of our favorite comments to get, is hearing from people who are wrestling fans, who they showed it to their friends or their loved ones who weren't wrestling fans, and that they like love the show, and like their loved ones and friends became like addicted to it as well, even though they weren't wrestling fans. And that's awesome, because we you know, we definitely wanted to gear the show towards a non-wrestling fan base, but we also wanted to please like the wrestling fan base. And Evan and I have been massive wrestling fans our whole life, and so we didn't want to let the wrestling fan base down, but we really want to introduce the show and wrestling to people who weren't fans. And I really wanted them to kind of see wrestling through like our POV, because we like hold it at like such a high regard, you know. I consider it to be the greatest art form that the planet Earth has ever created. And I always wanted to put it up on that pedestal because I always felt like it deserved it. And Evan and I, we love shoot interviews, which I'm sure you're familiar with, where a lot of them took place just in Ramada Inns, where people film these interviews with wrestlers.
Or some basements.
Stories, you know? And we just knew, we were like, man, these stories are so captivating, and an audience outside of wrestling, the wrestling fan base, will be able to connect with these stories and relate to them, you know. And the wrestling world just creates this really fantastical backdrop for these really real issues that I think anyone can connect with.
Agreed. And I think like you kind of touched on it a little bit there, is one of the things that you guys do really differently is that kind of theatrical, you know, cinematic approach to it all, with, you know, with the kind of the reenactments and things of that nature, the color scheme, the music. And I wanted to know, I mean, I talked about the style and how you guys came up with that with Evan, but I want to know from you, like, as far as the evolution goes with like wrestling and, you know, through film, what do you think kind of the biggest shift has been, specifically in wrestling documentaries, like say from Hitman Wrestling with Shadows to now? Like, what do you think the biggest shift has been in the documentaries, like the wrestling documentaries?
That's a good question. You know, I hold Wrestling with Shadows as one of the greatest just documentaries of all time.
Agreed.
I love that film. And I guess, you know, but then, like, when that documentary was made, I believe it was in part with some Canadian government financing through the the National Film Board of Canada, which is, you know, an awesome way to have gotten that story told. You know,
Yeah.
we had a lot of problems. Like originally with the show, before it was a documentary series, Evan and I had this dream of doing like a scripted narrative show that's kind of like The Sopranos meets Boogie Nights, but all within like the territory world of wrestling, especially that era of world class championship, you know, wrestling with
Yeah.
the Bon Air, Brody. But when we would pitch that to like studios in Hollywood, their wrestling is still kind of has the stigma of being this low brow form of entertainment, so they never took us seriously. So we thought, like, man, like, you know, we want to tell these stories in such an epic way, and the way we see it, doing it in a documentary form allowed us to just like, you know, get these stories told, but we really wanted to bring a cinematic quality to it. Like I was saying before, we wanted to hold these stories up in such a high regard, and you know, we were really inspired by the, you know, documentary films by Herzog and Errol Morris did the Thin Blue Line.
Yeah.
It just had you know, that level of attention to the stories, and the way, especially Errol Morris goes about pulling the stories out of his subjects. That's been a major influence.
Yeah. And my last question, Jason, hypothetical. I'm not going to ask you, are we going to get a season 3, or I know that, you know, that's up in the air, and we're all rooting for a season 3. But hypothetical scenario, season 3, you get the long sought after Vince McMahon episode, and you're in the room with Vince, and you're about to kickstart the interview. What's the first question that you pose to Vince to kickstart that episode?
Oh my God! You know, I actually have never even thought of that.
I'm putting you on the spot.
I just never thought that could be even in the realm of possibility. So I never would have known. But I don't know. Maybe I'd like to know. Maybe I'd like to know what this McMahon like dreams about. You know, like what are what are his nightmares? I'd probably want to know a lot of things about his childhood as well too. You know, he comes from such a rich family history in wrestling, and that I think, you know, from his father and grandfather, there's a lot of history there. I'd be so fascinated to know. But you know, I could sit here all for a week thinking of questions I could ask him.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I hope you guys get to do that one day, because I think that would be, you know, incredible.
It'd be awesome too to know like what we're like, like if he was like a kid, and you know, was he like when he was a kid and he was watching his dad work this business, was he like a fan of it too? And did he, as a kid, do any like make believe booking of himself, like with, I don't know, toys or anything, like just his own progression into telling stories through wrestling, because he came up with this, you know, incredible, especially the era I grew up in the 80s.
Yeah.
I just had so much nostalgia for it because it was just filled with so many great, over the top, high concept gimmicks that had such a lasting impression on me. You know, that all that stuff has got to come from a mind that is, you know, that you could put on par with like Walt Disney or someone, you know, that does have an incredible history of just of creative storytelling too, that I find fascinating.
No, agreed. And just on a side note, I asked Evan actually about if you guys ever did a Hulk Hogan documentary, like how would that go?
Oh, right.
And he said, oh, I would literally, if he could have Hulk Hogan and Vince McMahon in one room, that's all he would do.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah, I could see that.
He was like, we wouldn't need anything else. We just need those two.
Oh, well, you could do a whole season with just the two of those guys.
Yeah.
Because the history between them and what they did in the business at that time together is remarkable. And when we did the Macho Man and Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth's story, we interviewed Linda Balea.
Yeah.
who was Hulk Hogan's ex-wife, and her stories of just watching Hulk Hogan like navigate that world with Vince McMahon and the two of them together. It was just really fascinating. You know, she had just such amazing stories and perspective on it. But you know there's so much history there between the two, and it's an epic story.
Yeah, and I think you talk about, you know, that fascination with the 80s. I think you could kind of encapsulate the whole 80s era with just those two.
Oh, you could. Absolutely. Yeah, you definitely could. Kind of like, you know, I don't know if you've been watching the Michael Jordan, The Last Dance.
Oh, yeah.
Series. It's been great, you know, but what I love about it is it just like, it encapsulates that era, like you were saying, you know, it just like it gives you nostalgia for that 90s era of the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan, a phenom at that period. It's cool, you know. I could definitely see you doing something like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. I will say, Jason, thank you again so much for for your time, and I really really appreciate it. And I just want to say again a big congratulations for all the success you guys have had, and please tell Evan as well that I said again a big congratulations, and I'm rooting for season 3.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Thank you very much, guys.